Hello, hi, welcome back to Mia Likes Movies. My name is Mia and I do like movies. I like a lot of other things too, but Mia Likes Movies just sounded the best, I guess. Today we're going to be talking about probably my favorite video game of all time. That's right, again, we are talking about Baldur's Gate 3, specifically Wyll Ravengard, Blade of Frontiers. That was kind of cringe of me to do that, honestly. Now that patch 7 is officially out for PC, I've had an update of Baldur's Gate 3 TikToks on my For You page. Specifically, I've had a lot about the Wyll issue. Get it? Like skill issue? What the Wyll issue is basically that he doesn't really have a lot of content in the game, at least in comparison to the other Origin characters. He has less content by, I believe, about 1 to 2 hours at least. For patch 7, we had additional evil endings and new animations for Astarion and legendary actions for characters like the Skith Commander, but like not really anything for Wyll, who again has the least amount of content hours in the game. Why does this happen? I don't know if we're necessarily going to answer that question today, but this all just led me to want to talk about Wyll. So a few disclaimers before we begin here. I can't not love this game. Larian Studios has done an amazing job with this game as a whole, but we can and should criticize things that we love, or else we'll never move forward as a society. Secondly, we will be talking briefly about the early access version of Baldur's Gate 3. I just want to put it out on the table here. I did not play early access. At all. I did not. I was not there since the beginning of early access, all the way back in 2020. I joined the community, like the Baldur's Gate 3 community, in early 2023 before the game officially released, but that was more so on like TikTok and Twitter and things like that, but I wasn't like actually playing the game. I wanted at that point to just wait for the full release, but I have played the full release version of the game several times. And finally, there will be talk of racism in relationship to Wyll's character. I am quite obviously white, and while I can research as much as I want, my opinion will never matter as much as that of a black person in regards to racism. Wyll is black, and if we don't acknowledge or talk about the impact that this has on his story and the reception, we are doing a disservice to Wyll, his voice actor, and the industry as a whole. Oh, and also a spoiler warning for literally everything in Baldur's Gate 3. Thank you for sticking through with that long introduction, and now presenting What About Wyll? A summarized chronicle of the evolution and perception of the Blade of Frontiers. I just had to throw in a classic Mia Likes movie, lengthy and verbose title. I just had to. I did it for Astarion. I had to do it for Wyll. Is there a better place to start than the very beginning? Baldur's Gate 3 released in early access in October 2020. If you did not know, early access is basically paying to play a game that is in development, testing it and giving feedback to the developers and publisher. Baldur's Gate 3's early access was basically the first act of the game, from my understanding. The Wyll we met in early access is very different from the one that we meet in the full official release. Here is my best attempt at summarizing early access Wyll's journey. When Tav, the playable character, meets Wyll, he's still very much a warlock with an unknown patron to the playable character. He is known as the Blade of Frontiers, a hero to many amongst the Storm Coast. He is hanging out with the tieflings, helping them to defend themselves against the influx of goblins in the area. As we get to know EA Wyll, early access Wyll, you will learn that he is of noble birth. He did not get along well with his father, mostly due to the fact that he was like a bad kid.
The blade comes from noble stock, chief. Born in Baldur's Gate, bred in the upper city. And a steadfast dagger in my father's side. A different time, a different Wyll. My sticky fingers betrayed me. Always had a penchant for shiny things just out of reach. Inherited it from my old man. Then I went thieving in the wrong shadows. Got myself into trouble. Father shipped me off to the Flaming Fist. Figured they'd teach me a few lessons. Early access Wyll had a stealing problem, which led to his father sending him to the Flaming Fists for discipline. When he was a teenager, a goblin named Spike, who in early access you will meet as the torturer in the Absolute's camp at the Old Saluna Temple. This goblin Spike burned down his village, or was a part of the raid that burned down this village he was staying in, and took his eye. Mizora appeared to Wyll in the aftermath, not as herself, but as a presumably human woman, and she offered Wyll a chance to get revenge against the goblins, and he accepted. It was only after he accepted did Mizora reveal her true form, which is a Cambion, and Wyll's pact with her
as Warlock and Patron was sealed. Mizora gave him a Sending Stone eye prosthetic to fill the void that Spike the Gobbo left. So that's how Wyll gets into his pact and lost his eye in early access. It's important to mention that Wyll's Act 1 introduction quest had nothing to do with Karlach in early access. Karlach did not really exist the same way she does now, and she definitely at that point had nothing to do with Wyll's character or his character development. Plot-wise, the concept is still relatively the same. There were just some minor tweaks of his origins and things like that. Wyll's personality and dialogue were where the differences become most obvious. EA Wyll absolutely despised goblins, hated goblins.
You sing for me, Roach. Tell me everything you know. I know you ain't seeing much out of that eye pebble of yours. And there's an army of us, and just a couple of you. So you ain't the one gonna be asking questions.
Your parasite burns in concert with Wyll's, paralyzing rage and a hunger for answers.
This hatred stemmed from the fact that they burned down his village and stabbed his eye out, which led him to be trapped in his pact with Mizora, which I guess could be a valid response. I don't know. It makes sense that it would lead him to hate goblins, considering they ruined his life. He, in early access, would be more brutal, especially when dealing with goblins. At Joaquin's Rest, during the rescue of Counselor Floric, a flaming fist called Yeva tells Floric not to trust Wyll and that he is, quote, no hero.
Counselor, you mustn't trust this so-called Blade of Frontiers. He'll talk himself up, weave a nice tale. But I know the truth. And truth is, he's no hero.
And this seems to be the crux of EA Wyll's character. Wyll struggled with maintaining his image as the hero while plagued by his desire for vengeance against the goblins. For example, when the goblin Spike tells Wyll that he'll trade him some info on Mizora if he tortures this innocent adventurer that they have trapped in the prison in the Temple of Selûne, EA Wyll actually complies, but full release Wyll actually disapproves when you threaten to do or actually do torture the prisoner. There's also some dialogue in scenes where the subtext tells us that he may actually care more for the title or idea of being the Blade of Frontiers rather than actually being the Blade of Frontiers.
So you know the stories. All true, I might add. Won't be long before they're telling new tales. Mind flayers, flying ships, dragon attacks. The legend grows.
EA Wyll did seem to genuinely care about saving children, and I assume this is probably due to the fact that his life was uprooted as a child.
Did you see those tiefling kids back at the Grove? They should be chasing frogs, climbing trees, not training for battles they can't win.
Overall, EA Wyll was definitely more boisterous and slightly arrogant, but he was also complex in his desire for revenge and his less than savory past. Early access Wyll also had a completely different voice actor playing him. Lonry Malalu, an actor, director, and choreographer originally from Hackney, played the Blade of Frontiers prior to Theo Solomon coming on. There was no official reason released to the public as to why Lonry was recast, but I have some thoughts, opinions, theories, etc. If you didn't know this about me, I'm actually a huge accents and dialects nerd. I have been studying accents and dialects since high school, and I actually did an independent study in college exploring the International Phonetic Alphabet and how to teach it to different people, as well as a sort of deep dive on the Cockney accent and how to do it and teach it. So that's a fun fact about me. One thing I noticed in my research is the change in dialect Wyll had and its implications. So Lonry, the original voice actor for Wyll, seemed to use a dialect that was similar to his own personal dialect.
And it happened and I was in tears and crying like a baby after we were bowing.
We sniff out the Gobbo leaders and take their heads. And we free the Druid house in while we're at it.
He is from Hackney, like I said, which is an area in London, which is often associated with an accent known as MLE, or Multicultural London English. MLE is also sometimes colloquially known in academic spheres as like the new Cockney, as most of the working class people in London have evolved out of using the Cockney accent into using the MLE accent, with the influx of immigration into the country, and specifically London. A way to think of the MLE accent is is kind of like Cockney, but it has influences of Caribbean and African, specifically consonant sounds, but just sounds from those accents and languages in general. Some actors that people would be familiar with that also have this dialect are Daniel Kaluuya.
So you would want to me to not. So you're that kind of.
I was just wondering what you thought about that.
Not doing sex.
Would you not do them anymore?
No.
Or John Boyega.
What was that? What was that? Nah, that thing moved. I don't like that, man. Nah.
I think a lot of actors tend to get trained out of their accents, so they're less prominent. It's just part of the job. But they're also good examples of some of the sounds in Emily. So we can hear the major differences of this accent compared to a standard English accent in the plosive and fricative consonant sounds. So sounds like t will often switch over to d, or vice versa, or V sounds like v will turn into f, or vice versa. There's also a lot of prominent glottal stops in sounds where there's a T in the middle of two syllables. So words like pretty will become pretty, or words like bottle will become bottle. And that's kind of the Cockney influence coming in there. But it's also, again, present in Emily. So the implications of Wyll having an accent similar to Emily cannot be understated. First of all, the accent is typically associated with young people of color, specifically Black people in London. Oftentimes people with this accent are part of immigrant or working class families, and giving Wyll this accent does place him in a fairly specific time and place in our historical context, specifically in relation to accents. We know that Emily is a relatively newer dialect and is most prominent specifically in London. So this makes sense for Wyll's character in certain ways, as he grew up in Baldur's Gate, a huge city with many different people with all kinds of backgrounds. This accent for Wyll can also imply a more working class background, as this is what it is commonly associated with in our real life cultural context. That being said, this is often because of our biases and prejudices that we hold against people of color, specifically Black people, and how they speak. Accents, dialects, and slang typically associated with people of color, specifically Black people, are often associated with unprofessionalism or an assumed lower socioeconomic status. And these biases and prejudices are due to years and years of systemic and systematic oppression against Black people. I'm not the most qualified to talk about that, but it is important to bring that into this conversation. We assume a lot about the other people around us just based on how they speak. Let's just do a quick experiment, okay? Two people walk into a job interview for the same exact position. Here's person A. Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to meet you. And B. Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to meet you. Which person would you assume had more educational experience? Did you say person B? Most people would, because in America, the standard Southern accent is often associated with less education. You cannot assume one's background or experience just based on how they speak. So to relate that experiment back to Wyll, E.A. Wyll had a noble background, just like the full release Wyll. E.A. Wyll had a dialect more commonly associated with the working class. Full release Wyll's accent is slightly more standardized, at least in the academic sense.
I've been waiting for this druid Halcyon to return. They say he's pretty powerful. He could probably help us. Problem is, the goblins have nabbed him. We better go find him before we start growing talons and tentacles.
Better friends than the ones hitching a ride in our skulls, at least. I'm sure you know the stories. Doomed to shed our skin and become illithid. They say there's no coming back. But we haven't sprouted any tentacles. Not yet, anyway. Could just be good luck.
However, again, both are assumed to have a noble background, in the general sense, not the mechanic sense. I can't help but wonder if they changed the voice actor because they felt Lonry's depiction of Wyll and his dialect were not noble enough, and so, for lack of a better word, to up Wyll's assumed socioeconomic status, they changed his voice. Even if Larian does or did not hold the opinion that MLE equals not upper class, it doesn't mean that their internal biases were not subconsciously present while making this decision. Or it could have been a conscious decision to do this, as maybe they were trying to assume their audience's assumptions and biases about people with MLE accents. But all of that is just my opinion. Emphasis on my opinion.
That's my opinion!
I don't know why they recast Lonry, and I love Theo. I just find the implications of it all quite interesting, but I can't stay in the world of dialects and accents and voice acting forever. So let us look at Wyll Ravengard as we meet him in the fully released game. On the Baldur's Gate 3 website, Wyll Ravengard is referred to as, quote, living legend. This is his description. From a scion of a famed Baldurian house to a life of adventure on the road, Wyll's life as the monster hunter called the Blade of Frontiers has made him one of the beating hearts of the Sword Coast. While he has done great deeds for the coast's people, the source of his power remains secret. The Cambion Mizora drew Wyll into a warlock's pact in a moment with many lives at stake, and cursed him with the duty of hunting her enemies. Mizora only asks Wyll to sacrifice devilish creatures to her, but a Cambion's ambitions are ever fickle, and Wyll wishes to escape the pact before its price grows cruel. A very compelling narrative indeed. So let's go through Wyll's overall arc by analyzing his personal quest, also aptly named the Blade of Frontiers. As the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki describes it, Wyll's journey is all about him dealing with what it truly means to be a hero, battling ideals instilled within him by his father. It's also important to note that Wyll's overall quest line is also intrinsically tied to two other quests, Hunt the Devil and the Grand Duke. I'm going to try and talk about his questline in a more narrative sense. So I'm going to try and weave these three quest lines together as we go. We will also be assuming a good playthrough as the default for the purpose of this video. If you want a breakdown on those three quests specifically and how to beat them, just go to the wiki. So we meet Wyll outside of the Druid's Grove as Tav hears Aroden and his band of boobs attempting to get into the Druid Grove for refuge from goblins. The tiefling refugees won't let them in, and the goblins descend as they're bickering. As the battle begins, Wyll appears to save the day.
Provoke the blade, then suffer its sting.
Once the battle ends and the goblins are defeated, Wyll retreats back into the grove to help train some of the tiefling children how to fight. Tav speaks to Wyll, and it is revealed that Wyll was also on the Mind Flayer's ship and got tadpoled. He tells Tav that his main priority right now is to hunt down a devil named Karlach, whose presence is a threat to the safety of the Sword Coast. Tav and the party do assist Wyll in this hunt, finding Karlach near the toll house on the Risen Road. The two have a sort of confrontation, and Wyll realizes that Karlach is not the huge threat that he was told she was, and that she is not a devil, but just a simple tiefling, who happens to be a victim. So Wyll decides not to kill Karlach, and Karlach will join the party against the Absolute. My foot fell asleep. At Joaquin's Rest, also near the Risen Road, there is a fire at the inn. Inside, Counselor Floric is trapped. The Flaming Fist, which is a sort of ironic name considering the current situation that they're all in right now, asks the party for help in the rescuing of her. Once rescued, Counselor Floric actually recognizes Wyll, and the two have a sort of small reunion, and Floric brings up Wyll's dad, who is revealed to be Grand Duke Ulder Ravengard of Baldur's Gate. Information that was previously unknown to the party because Wyll was keeping it a secret. Floric tells Wyll that his dad has gone missing, taken by drow that are presumably in cahoots with the cult of the Absolute. Floric bids Wyll and the party goodbye, setting off to find the Duke. During the next long rest, a Cambion manifests itself at Camp Mizora.
Wyll, you've been naughty.
This is Wyll's patron. She punishes him for not killing Karlach and thus breaking his contract with her. Wyll goes through a transformation, now bearing the eyes and horns of a devil. It's important to note that he is not a devil himself. He's still human. He just has the appearance of a devil. That is Wyll's journey in Act 1. In Act 1, much like most of the other companion characters, Wyll's quest doesn't necessarily align with the overall main quest line in the game, which is to defeat the Absolute. And what I mean by that specifically is that if you were to go into Baldur's Gate 3 completely unaware of anything about the plot, characters, nothing, in Act 1, you could feel comfortable ignoring Wyll's personal quest line because it feels irrelevant to the overall story. And that story being getting rid of the Illithid tadpoles and taking down the cult of the Absolute. Sure, Wyll's dad, Duke Ravengard, is kidnapped, presumably by the Absolute, but at this point in the game, we don't really understand how that is important to the overall story. Yes, he is an important political figure in Baldur's Gate that we assume has a decent amount of power because he's a Grand Duke, but because the quest to find him doesn't immediately continue in Act 1, it doesn't feel as vital or detrimental to the story if we don't find him in that moment. And also at this point, we don't have the context necessarily of his importance through exposition that is present in Act 1. And what I mean by that is we don't necessarily hear about Duke Ravengard from anyone else in Act 1 besides Floric and the Flaming Fist. No one talks about him, but like he was in the area. No random NPC anywhere else is like, did you hear Duke Ravengard was in the area? You know what I mean? The seeds aren't sown enough to feel like Duke Ravengard's disappearance is really connected to the overall plot, more so than Will's personal journey, if that makes sense. So like in theory, someone playing the game for the first time may not feel compelled to follow his quest at this point in the game. So now on to Act 2. In Act 2, Will's quest picks up again on the way to Moonrise Towers to confront the cult of the Absolute. Mizora manifests to request the party, as per Will's contract, to aid in the rescue of one of Zariel's assets, and at this time the asset is not known to Will or the party. Mizora can be persuaded to end Will's contract with the rescue of this asset for Moonrise Towers. And as for the rescue of Duke Ravengard, Floric and the Flaming Fist can actually be found at Last Light Inn, but it appears that there's been no progress made in the search. They don't have any updates really, and they just basically say they're gonna head off to Baldur's Gate because they haven't found anything yet. So after exploring Moonrise Tower, Zariel's asset can't be found anywhere. Instead, the asset is actually found underneath Moonrise Towers in a suspicious Mind Flayer colony below Moonrise. Did I say that? It's underneath Moonrise. Turns out the asset is actually Mizora herself, who was captured by the cult to be Tadpole, we assume. Mizora is freed, and Will is technically free from his contract in like 6 months in the future because of that oh so pesky fine print. Also, in the Mind Flayer colony, we can find the Chosen Three, that is Ketheric Thorm, Lord Enver Gortash, and Orin the Red, and they're all having like a little meeting, and the three infect Grand Duke Ravengard with an Illithid tadpole and send him off to Baldur's Gate. And that's Will's plotline, basically, in Act 2. So Act 2 overall is actually a very Shadowheart heavy act. The Shadow Curse and Ketheric Thorm's plans are directly tied to Shar, and there are compelling reasons to follow Shadowheart's personal quests in order to stop both the Shadow Curse and Ketheric Thorm's plans. The same thing cannot be said for Will. Mizora goes out of her way to request help from the party. However, once again, there are no implications that it will further the plot of the overall story. Like, yes, one playing for the first time could assume that the asset is very important to the cult of the Absolute and could potentially foil their plans if released. However, considering the last time we had trusted Mizora's word, she told us to kill Karlach. So like when Mizora appears to the party, it feels like a bump in the road, like an extreme side quest, rather than a quest that is tied to the main story, especially considering that you need to go below Moonrise. That's like, feels very out of the way. Even though it's not, but it can feel that way. And yes, we do get a glimpse of the Grand Duke again, but we don't necessarily feel the weight of his tadpoling because we have not yet seen his impact as a politician on the city. We haven't seen how important he is to the city and how it functions. We can't assume how bad it is that he is now controlled by the Absolute, if that makes sense. So Act 3, Baldur's Gate, we've made it. Hooray. Hallelujah, thank the gods. Mizora appears to Will again to request that they attend Lord Gortash's coronation. At the coronation, Ravengard is there to swear in Gortash as the new Archduke of Baldur's Gate. Bow, 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 bow. Talking to Ulder and connecting with his parasite reveals that he is actively being controlled by the cult of the Absolute, using his influence as the Grand Duke to give Gortash, and therefore the Absolute, more political power in the city. So after the coronation, Mizora tells Will and the party that Duke Ravengard has been moved to a second location.
Shut up, you're all gonna die. Street smart.
Mizora also presents another contract to Will, pledge his life in service of Mizora and Zariel to save the Duke, or officially be free of Mizora's influence and potentially doom the Duke to his death. It's not a definite dooming to his death, but it's a pretty much a dooming to his death. Duke Ravengard is then moved to the Iron Throne, which in this context has nothing to do with George R.R. Martin. The Iron Throne, in this case, is an underwater prison in Baldur's Gate. So Will, Tab, and the party rescue him and take him back to camp. That makes it sound a lot easier than it actually is. That little quest is hard. and you need to prepare for it, okay? It's not as easy as I just made it sound. But let's just jump over that for now. At camp, Duke Ravengard gives Wyll a quest to gather aid from the Great Worm Answer. He is found below Worm's Rock Fortress. After using some lightning magic to reveal the passageway to the Wormway, the 4 trials of justice, insight, strategy, and courage are revealed. During the trial of justice, Wyll notes that the right path to justice often lies between 2 extremes, eating to have in the decision of which painting to place in the lock, thus completing the trial. In the trial of insight, after reading all of the flying books, Wyll will literally tell you which person to kill, again completing the trial. And during the trial of strategy, Wyll doesn't actually help you during that one. Gale does, because apparently he's a fan of chess. It's not called chess, but it's chess. So, note to all of you playing Act 3 of Baldur's Gate 3. When you're doing this quest line, bring Gale and Wyll to the Wormway. They will help. And the Trial of Courage is just a combat trial, so just win. Moving on. Unfortunately, it's just his skeletal remains, as he is dead. It is also revealed that he and the Emperor had a very close relationship. Oh, and also that the Emperor is Balduran. Oh, and also that Balduran killed Answer. What? This confrontation riles up Answer's spirit so much that it causes him to attack the party. After defeating Answer's angry spirit, Wyll and the party return to camp to inform Ravengard and Mizora of what happened. Alder suggests that Wyll become a Grand Duke of the city. Wyll can say yes or no. Regardless, Ravengard will aid the party in the ending fight against the Cult of the Absolute. And that's really the end of Wyll's questline in Act 3 and the game, I guess, overall. Wyll's journey definitely becomes more important to the main questline in Act 3. Suddenly, we are confronted with the impact of Duke Ravengard's capture and must stop it. Not to mention the Answer and Balduran reveal. And honestly, I hate this part of the game. Feel that Answer is dead just feels so underwhelming. You get so hyped up to help this dragon. You have to figure out that you have to use lightning magic to reveal the Wormway. And then you get to the Wormway and there's these 4 trials. And you're solving puzzles and you're doing combat. You're playing chess. And then you get there and it's he's dead. And that can be purposeful. But I just did 4 trials. I did 2 puzzles. I did chess and a combat. All that just for him to be dead. And also, Answer attacks you even if you haven't been super friendly with the Emperor, because I've done a playthrough where I was not a fan of the Emperor, and every single time he tried to help me, I was like, no, you're gross. It wouldn't even let me roleplay that and be like, I'm not with this guy, I'm on your side, Answer. You don't have a choice. Answer just doesn't trust you because he thinks you're a thrall, which I get, but it's also dude, I don't like this guy either. Oh, and then the reveal that the Emperor is Balduran is just crazy on so many levels. And then also the reveal that Balduran and Answer probably had a romantic, possibly sexual relationship. I just felt during this quest line, I was getting whiplash every 5 seconds. I was like, oh my God, what? He's gay? Oh my God, oh my God, he's dead. You know what I mean? It just felt a lot. But I also feel that way about Act 3 in general. I'm a huge believer that it should have been 4 acts, maybe 5, honestly, because there's just so much happening in Act 3 that it feels really overwhelming. And my computer can't handle it, okay? My computer needs a break. So in all honesty, because of this, Wyll's journey in Act 3 feels too much. It's almost like Larian forgot to make Wyll important in Act 1 and Act 2. And then they got to Act 3 and they were like, shit, we forgot about Wyll. Let's just shove it all in there. But all of that being said, I understand why people feel Wyll's questline is out of place. And that's because it kind of is, at least in Act 1 and Act 2. But you can't deny that in Act 3, his personal quest becomes intrinsically tied to the main quest line. In order to truly take down Gortash and the Absolute, you have to save Duke Ravengard. You don't have to, but I mean, who's going to take Gortash's place if you kill him, right? It just makes sense that you would save Duke Ravengard if you were covering all your bases. So Wyll has a couple of potential epilogue endings after the Absolute is defeated and you have your party with Withers. So if Wyll does not kill Karlach and chooses to not become the Grand Duke of Baldur's Gate, he becomes the Blade of Avernus. So he is still in his pact with Mizora. He spends his days hunting down devils in Avernus. Hence the title, The Blade of Avernus. Wyll can also be sent to Avernus with Karlach if she's persuaded to go to Avernus to live instead of blowing up It's not funny, it's actually really sad. But they become like devil fighting besties together, and it's really cute. I really like it. It's also like you could infer that they like end up having a romantic relationship, but also they say that they like don't really have time for that. So like whatever, you can interpret that however you want. If Wyll chooses to become the Grand Duke of Baldur's Gate, he helps in the reconstruction of the city after the final battle, and if his dad was rescued and kept alive, they continue to have a relationship and they work together to bring peace back to Baldur's Gate. If Wyll is still in his pact with Mizora and he chooses to be the Grand Duke, Mizora will like kind of hang about in human form to kind of just watch Wyll and keep him under her leash. And finally, if Wyll's quest wasn't completed or he killed Karlach and chose to not become Grand Duke, he's still just the Blade of Frontiers, just like slaying monsters and having fun all over the Sword Coast. So good for him, I guess. So this video is already long enough as it is, and we still have a little bit more to go, but I feel like I would be remiss in my video essayist duties if we did not at least touch on Wyll's romance. And like, unlike some of the other romance options in the game, Wyll's romance is a bit more typical, a bit more flowery. Let's just say you're not getting like a horn dog playthrough if you romance Wyll, and that's okay. That's okay, all right? That does not mean his romance is bad. It's just not filled with like sex, okay? You guys, it's okay. It's okay. And we're pro-horny on this channel, okay? I am very pro-horny. Look at the content, okay? We are pro-horny. So like Wyll's tiefling party is a little bit more subtle than the others. Minthara, if you pass a DC 15 persuasion check, you can kiss him. Overall though, like his vibe during the party is like not standoffish. He's just like a little out of it. Like he's sad, like he's having a moment, right? And the player doesn't have an option to sleep with him at the tiefling party, but you can dream about him. It's like a slow burn, okay? In Act 2, we get our famous dancing scene with Wyll, and during the slow dance, the players can kiss Wyll, and then the player can kiss Wyll a second time, or even like suggest spending the night together, but he will decline as he says he wants like a more fairy tale relationship. It's a slow burn, okay? It's romantic and cute and fluffy, and that's okay. So to continue Wyll's romance in Act 3, you have to complete his personal quest. Duh. 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 I mean, that seems like self-explanatory, but it must be said, okay? And also, if the Duke is killed under any circumstances, Wyll will break up with you, okay? Even if you didn't mean to kill the Duke, he will break up with you because he is sad and doesn't want to hurt you. If Wyll's quest is completed, he'll propose to you. And if Wyll chooses to be the Grand Duke, you guys can adopt a child together. Her name's like Lily Aurora Ravengard. It's so cute. Oh, I'm gonna cry. I think Wyll's romance is often overshadowed by a lot of the other companions' romances, simply because you can't have sex with him immediately, and also because he seems to respect the player immediately. Pursuing him is, like I said, a slow burn. It's like you gotta go through your talking stage, your dating stage, and then you get married, right? And I know a lot of people like enemies to lovers or that yaoi toxic bullshit, and I get it. I do. Trust me. But that doesn't make his romance shitty. Like, it doesn't make his romance bad. I love Wyll's romance, okay? It's so romantic in like the historical essence of romantic. If you don't like it, it just means you don't respect yourself. Go to therapy. Go to therapy. That's a joke. I just want to make it clear that's a joke, okay? About 11 months ago on the Baldur's Gate 3 subreddit, Lambsauce3 asked, why do people not like Wyll? A simple question. Fabled Warriors reply got 1.5k upvotes, and I fear it summarizes the whole Wyll issue quite well. They said, the main complaint people have with Wyll is that he is boring. The reason for this is that his character doesn't really have an option to arc across the game. He's always good and doesn't regret his deal, which he views to be for the greater good. Shadowheart, Astarion, Gale, and Lae'zel can arc much further, depending on choices. Karlach is the most similar in not arcing, but her bubbly attitude contrasts more with her desperate story and barbarian class. Wyll's resigned acceptance of Mizora's shenanigans is a bit flatter. I think Wyll works best as a player character, choosing to embrace or regret his devilish deal. It's true. Many people feel that Wyll as a character and his personal questline are boring. I literally found a whole article on thegamer.com just calling him boring. Here's the thing. I wanted to go through Wyll's quest line first because I felt it would be a more objective way to analyze whether or not it is boring. And we kind of touched on it already, but like, how could a quest line that has devils and dragons and political intrigue be boring? Those things are objectively not boring. I think some people, though, might feel that way because, like we discussed, a lot of it doesn't feel tied to the main quest line until Act 3. It feels boring because it feels random or out of place or not justified. We don't necessarily have a reason to care about Grand Duke Ravengard until he is literally ordaining Gortash. And that's like 100 hours into the game, right? So it can feel boring if one does not have the motivation to complete those given tasks. And as far as Wyll as a character being boring versus his quest line, I just don't think that's true. His character concept is objectively interesting. A Game Rant article from early 2021 makes a good point about Wyll. They argue that he subverts the warlock class by being, quote, surprisingly good-natured, as the warlock class can often be evil aligned due to its inherent theme of trading something for a greater power and dealing with devils and things like that. If he was a paladin, I could understand why he was called boring. A good paladin, the sky is blue, right? A warlock, a good aligned warlock is an interesting concept. You're making a deal with an evil aligned character to have the power to do good things. There's conflict there. And that all brings me back to Fabled Warriors' post, and specifically the last point that they make in their post. Wyll makes a great origin character to play because of this conflict. His journey is all about whether or not to embrace his devilish powers and whether or not to use those powers for good or evil, which again is not boring at all, really. I think that's quite interesting. And then there are some people who think Wyll is boring because he's good. And I get it. It can be less interesting to play with a person who is just simply morally good because it's a game all about making choices and role playing, and people are never just good. But also to that, I say go to therapy. People can be good. That's a joke. No, I just, I guess like in that sense, he's not a complex character because he does want to do good, but I don't think there's anything wrong with having a hero character that wants to be good. I think it would be weird if it was a fantasy game that didn't have that. But maybe that's a controversial hot take. I don't know. I do think that the overall lack of Wyll content does not help him fight the battle against being boring, though. There's just overall, objectively, less to do with him. Of course, it's going to feel boring in comparison to a character like Shadowheart, who literally has all of Act 2 essentially dedicated to her personal questline. Or someone like Astarion, who has hours and hours of extended content to feed the horny sickos on TikTok. I love Astarion. I do. I made a whole video about him. But I don't think we needed a new Ascended Astarion ending. He's not even the most romance character in the game. That's Shadowheart. I feel like we're constantly getting more Astarion content. I don't know. Wyll deserves more. Finally, I think if Wyll was white, there would be a much different reaction to him. Unfortunately, this is not just a Baldur's Gate fandom issue. Backlash and heightened criticism against Black characters in media has been an issue as long as racism has existed, which is basically like forever. People would have been more willing to overlook his lack of content and boringness if he had been a conventionally attractive white guy. I've seen him be compared to romance companions like Cullen or Alistair in the Dragon Age series, and I do see those comparisons, but the difference is that they're white. There's also a part of me that believes that Wyll's character was watered down in the transition from early access to full release because of racism. I fear that they made Wyll a obviously undeniably good character because they, as in Larian, did not want to receive backlash regarding making their one Black companion bad. When I say bad, I don't mean a poorly written character, but morally bad. Early access Wyll was definitely more morally gray, as we talked about. He was more arrogant and self-centered, but those traits went away during the full release. Those traits sort of went away with the full release of the game. Instead, they opted for a Wyll who was pretty strictly lawfully good besides his contract with Mizora. He is overall very selfless and kind to everyone because I guess we can't have complexly written characters of underrepresented backgrounds because that would be bad representation, right? That was sarcasm. That was sarcasm, just to be clear. That was sarcasm. You know, I've talked about it before on this channel, but we really struggle with a lack of media literacy and comprehension. And so a lot of times people will mistake complex characters for bad, as in morally bad. So oftentimes this leads to characters from marginalized backgrounds suffering from a lack of plot lines or character development in fear of backlash from the woke left. No, but like people are afraid if they write like a gay character as being morally gray, that people might assume that all gay people are bad, or that gay people will get mad because they wrote a gay character to be mean. And it's like, gay people can be mean. The issue is both a production issue as well as an audience issue. It's double-sided. And I don't really have an answer to that issue. But I don't think the answer to that issue is to sort of simplify all characters of underrepresented backgrounds, because people are complex beings and it's okay. And that's like okay to have and reflect in our media, and we should have that reflected in our media, right? And like sometimes there is bad representation, right? Bad as in bad. But like when a character is written with care from a team with diverse backgrounds, the representation won't be bad. The issue comes when the people in the room don't reflect the different types of stories that they want to tell. It's like when a bunch of straight people try to write a gay character, or a bunch of white people try to write a black character, they just kind of guess, and then they get nervous, and then they're like, well, if we just like make them like good, then they can't get mad at us. Watering down a character storyline to make them more palatable to whatever audience you're trying to appease to is questionable. Again, I don't really have an answer to that, and I'm not saying that's even what happened at all. This is all just like allegedly, hypothetically in Minecraft, you know? Also, like, I'm not black, right? I'm white. And I don't want to speak over or for the black community specifically regarding a black character. I do, as a white person, want to use my privilege to bridge the conversation to an audience that might only listen to white people. Because racism, that's what you use your privilege for. Hating Wyll's character does not make you racist. Hating him because he is black does. There are valid criticisms regarding the writing of his character. But if you have an issue with him that isn't because of those sorts of criticisms, I suggest you take a look inward and ask yourself why. Why do you have a problem with Wyll? And if your initial reaction to me bringing up Wyll's race was something along the lines of, why are you bringing race into this? Not everything is about race. Well, Wyll is black. That's a part of his character, and failing to take that into account does him a disservice, and it does his story a disservice. Yes, it's a fantasy game in a fantasy universe, but that doesn't mean our real life biases and prejudices aren't present in that fantasy world. You are still you when you're playing a video game, even if it's a role-playing game and you're playing a character, because you can't separate your subconsciousness from yourself while you're playing. Same way writers can't separate subconscious parts of themselves while writing. That's why they're called internal biases. You cannot truly and completely separate yourself from your playable character. So any biases and prejudices you might have in real life, you'll have in the game as well. So you have to acknowledge that Wyll is black, because people are black. And ignoring it isn't going to solve any issues. I hope that all made sense. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed What About Wyll? A summarized chronicle of the evolution and perception of the Blade of Frontiers. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of Wyll's character? Have you romanced Wyll? What are your thoughts on the lack of Wyll content, specifically in patch 7? I want to know. Remember to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.